Are there people still signing in, Will?
Give me 1 second to check that out. Yes.
And you don't see Liz or Keith.
Liz is here. Hi, Liz.
Oh, hi,
Thanks for
Liz.
coming.
Who tried to vote today and how many hours did it take you?
I voted on Sunday, only 4 hours and 15 minutes.
Oh, that was hardly anything.
Hardly anything.
At,
But you know what? It felt,
Wagner Junior High?
what?
Were you at Wagner?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it felt so good. I almost wanted to put it in the box because I'm scared of being indoors.
Right.
I couldn't do it. I had to vote.
Barbara, you're talking, but you're on mute.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
Am
now
I?
you're not. Hello.
Were you meaning Barbara Chucky?
I voted by absentee ballots Sunday, so it went very quickly.
Okay.
Let me go to the front of the line and just stick it in the box.
Well, I've been having such fights with them. They overpopulated Wagner by way too many voters.
Oh, no, they did. It was awful.
It's
But I went to
crazy.
the front of the line. At least that wasn't the problem, going to the front of the line and use the drop box.
No, that's good. And today they figured out to move the drop box so you don't even have to stand in line to get to the drop box.
You know,
And
I
they've
didn't
expanded
have to.
hours for Friday, Saturday, Sunday to
Yeah,
give
no,
more
I saw you.
hours.
Yeah, the drop boxes worked very well.
Yes, if you have an absentee ballot.
Yeah, I had one. I did that.
You know, Barbara, I saw you and I kept looking for you and I said, where did you go? I saw you go back and then forward again. I was on that line.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
I don't know. It was
That was my plan from the beginning,
yeah.
to use the drop box.
Oh yeah. Well, sort of was. And then I said, I can't do it. I have to.
But that felt good too.
Yeah.
Good.
I don't think there's going to be anybody left to vote on election day.
I know, that's what I'm wondering. If I'm going to try again. I keep running out of time to stand in the line. So I might just be one of those rare voters that shows up on Tuesday and goes and votes, and maybe there won't be anyone left. I don't know.
You know, they say that every day and every day there's another 100,000.
I know.
Yeah, I thought it would. I would not have to wait in such a line today, and then I saw on Twitter 5 hours.
Yep.
So
Today was the worst, actually, the longest lines. So
And everybody say, well, why don't you vote when when people are at work? Well, it's not working. And then
no,
I thought,
they've been consistent, like from the minute they open till night. They're
Right.
that long an hour. They're that long, the lines. But there is a separate line for seniors, and
Yeah,
they
but
were marketing
didn't
that
wanna
was
take
only an
care of
hour and a half at Wagner.
Yeah.
So we have to redesign the entire way we do elections in this.
Yep.
We definitely. But
But
Liz, I
let's
think
hope
I got
the
that
whole
one.
thing is going well everywhere else in the country too,
Yep.
where it matters.
let's
Well,
hope.
Let's
I
hope
see
that
Billy.
May
Maybe
I-
since we're waiting for Keith, we could unmute Billy.
Yeah, if I may ask Senator Kruger something, and hi, Senator, good to see you. I'm very worried about Election Day. And given the lines we've seen, I know we're going to have more sites open, but we're also going to have more voters. And people, I think, acted on the assumption that, I don't trust the mail-in voting, so I'm going to vote early. Now I'm scared about voting early. The governor proposed a year or so ago an Election Day holiday. I'm wondering if there's any possibility of some sort of emergency, whether it's executive order or I think it would have to be a vote, to make this coming Election Day a holiday, because I think people are going to be disenfranchised if they've got to wait in long lines on a working Tuesday.
Well, how does it make it less lines if you make it a holiday on Tuesday? I'm confused.
I think for me, the issue is you're going to have long lines probably regardless, but you need a protection for people who are going to need to know that they can wait. And if it's going to take an hour or two, then that's what they'll have to do. I mean, this is going to be their last chance to vote. It's not going to be, I can show up, but if it's 2 or 3 hours, I'll go home and try another day. This is it. So I think we have to build in that protection for people because the long lines are probably inevitable.
So frankly, Billy, it's just too long for anything legislative. We're talking about this coming Tuesday. I can double check whether there is an executive order power that would create some kind of, you can't get penalized pay-wise if you're a few hours for voting. But I've got my doubts that the governor will be willing to even go down that road.
And
So I
don't they
think,
have to give you time off for election day? I think 2 hours before or after the polls close.
I'll check, Barbara. I don't remember.
I thought that was on the books already, but
I think you're right, but I don't want to misspeak.
Okay.
So Billy, if you make sure that I have a way to find you tomorrow, like my email is really easy. It's my name at Gmail. So just send me off an email and so I'll know how to respond to you. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Sure.
Liz, you just told that to the entire internet.
I think the entire internet already has my
I
email.
think they do.
And my cell phone number will, so it's okay. Who here didn't know how to find me? Seriously, you've been doing something wrong.
I think they do.
I think they do too. I haven't changed my cell phone number since I first ran in the year 2000. Do you know how many people I have given that number to in my 20 years? It'll be 20 years if people elect me again on Tuesday when I go back in January, which is a serious sanity test you ought to be trying to give me very, very soon. Wait till after Tuesday, but then pull out the sanity test. But yeah, I haven't changed my phone number or my email, which is just my name. So it's pretty easy to find me. And many people find me by standing outside my front door on my block because I've lived the same place for 31 years also.
And I think we were just joined by Councilmember Powers. So we're going to mute him. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Keith.
Hi there. Hey, Senator. Hey, everyone. Nice to see you guys.
Hi, Keith.
Hey there.
We were discussing the chaos of early voting.
Wagner is very, very
Really
bad.
bad.
Yeah, and I think it's just too many people sort of assigned to that location, it seems like.
Yeah, they assigned 117,000 voters to that one site.
Crazy.
And they assigned 10,000 voters to the NYU facility, which is like a giant student center. So you explain this logic to me.
No, it's crazy. It's crazy.
I've been having fights with Board of Election all week.
Yeah, we're gonna have to find more locations, and they're gonna have to be willing to put more locations into place. And it's not easy. I've called some folks to try to get them to sign up as early voting places, libraries, and other cultural institutions, things like that. If you want to be able to do the week-long thing, but it is kind of part of the civic duty here.
So I passed a bill in the Senate. It just didn't pass the Assembly yet.
Yeah.
And one part of it is not using schools for early voting.
Right.
But the other part of it is if you're a cultural institution and you're taking money from the local government, you don't get to say no.
Yeah. We give them a lot of money.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
Yes, you do. So.
All right.
I don't know if these people want to change a crime. I'm happy to discuss voting or crime.
Yeah. Yeah. I think
Let's
if
go
we
make
keep
one the
talking
other.
about voting, we'll talk about it all night. So I think, Barbara, are you ready to start as well?
You're sure.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Rebecca Dangor, and I'm joined by my co-chair, Barbara Rutter, and we want to welcome you to the October meeting of the Health, Seniors, and Social Services Committee, where we want to begin our conversation on criminal justice reform. I will preface by saying this is just the first of several meetings we want to hold on this topic. Originally, CB8 had a public safety committee, but it's since been merged with our HSS committee. And not to be poetic, but I think that's kind of fitting as it suggests a more holistic approach. We had hoped to be joined by a member of the 19th precinct, but unfortunately that will have to wait until another meeting, but we are joined by two awesome speakers. We have Councilmember Keith Powers, who's chair of the Criminal Justice Committee of the New York City Council, and State Senator Liz Krueger, who's chair of the Finance Committee. And we'll begin with Councilmember Powers, who will talk about defunding the police, and then we'll move to Liz Krueger, who will discuss bail reform, and then we'll open it up to questions for both speakers. And again, let me stress, this is just the beginning of the conversation, dismantling information, addressing community concerns. And I know this is a heated topic, so I just ask that everyone be respectful. Barbara, any thoughts?
Oh, it was great. Thank you.
Okay, with that, let's turn it over to Councilmember Powers.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks everybody for having me here tonight. I always enjoy seeing folks from CB8 and also just being able to discuss things that are happening in the city and the local community. And always good to see my favorite state senator. Don't tell anybody else, Liz Krueger, as well. I'll try to keep this concise. Obviously this year there was missed COVID and everything else happening in 2020. We've been having a very serious conversation about public safety and the role of the policing and budgets and things like that as part of the city council's dialogue around these issues, social justice and policing issues this year. And I think that when we got to, as we were going through our budget process this year, we started to talk, and COVID having such a disparate impact on different communities and also having such a large dent into our city budget, we started to have really serious conversations about where we prioritize and how to make the appropriate adjustments to our budget. I'll start by just saying, even somewhat midstream before lots of the protests started, lots of the conversation dialogue around policing started, the council itself started to look at the mayor's proposed budget and thought it didn't really accurately reflect a lot of the priorities of this community, the city, and many of us, because it did attempt to start zeroing out programs that were really important to us, programs at CUNY, Department of Education, foster care, the serious cuts to environmental programs, and it made, serious cuts and left open serious questions about particular programs, but also did not make a single dollar cut to certain agencies, particularly NYPD. So the very beginning, we said, doing a budget appropriately means a sacrifice in a number of different places, but we would really be making a mistake if we took away money for affordable housing programs and CUNY and education departments and fair student funding at the city level and those type of things. So we started to have a dialogue with the mayor's office about what we thought was disparate cuts to certain agencies and really not trying to address spending in other places. And this was really around the public safety agencies. I chair the Criminal Justice Committee, so I oversee the Department of Corrections. And similar, same thing, we were asking for information on the personnel and overtime and same types of conversations. Are we making the right decisions for our budget? And then we started to have a very serious conversation nationwide about the role of the police department. And that's where we even furthermore went into start talking about functions of department and things like accountability. And I always say, we're fortunate here. We have, I think, a pretty good working relationship with the folks that work in the local precincts here. I have a good relationship with the department. But obviously, there should always be a conversation around the right sizing. What is the right appropriate size? What's the appropriate role? How much money are we spending in one area versus the other? And that's what became the big part of the conversation around the budget this year. Now, the word defund, I think, takes on different meanings for different people. Some people mean absolutely, remove money from the police department in New York City. I think many were using it to say, a priority shift around spending here in the city and to move money from just the sort of enforcement aspect to other programs and other services. And I think many people had different ways to express it, different terms that were used, but ultimately wanted to see a reshifting in priority. And the thing that we have to do is to make sure that we are investing in public safety to make sure people feel safe in their community, but also make sure that we are doing one of the big things that we were able to do in the council as part of this budget process was to rescue money for the CUNY program that really helps folks in the community colleges stay on track to graduate and get appropriate services, whether it's getting a Metro card to show up to school every day or having a counselor to actually help them guide through the process to make sure our public schools didn't get lose all the funding, to save a lot of programs to food pantries and other programs. And it's a kind of an unfortunate dance we have to do between us and the mayor, but it's a necessary one. And it really allowed us to sort of do some rebalancing, reshifting. I will say, obviously there's been a lot of feedback on that budget in the last couple months, people on both sides who feel didn't go far enough or went too far. But I think we did try to find some balance between these issues and to try to start correcting for, I think, what was overspending in certain areas, and to make sure we didn't drastically cut other parts of the budget that would have been really undermine goals of ours in the city to keep people safe, to give them opportunity. So that was really where we kind of balanced these things out. I think in the coming year, and we're going to get into a new budget, we're going to continue to have a conversation about what's the right size, what is the right functions. Make sure we don't, make sure we don't drastically undercut a feeling or a component of public safety in our community, but also make sure that citywide we're making the right types of choices around how we spend what is a decreasing amount of dollars that we have available to us. So, what I leave off is I think people do hear the word defund, and I think rightfully ask the question of what does that mean? Defund. I think people have different questions, answers to everything. But I think ultimately a lot of folks were asking the question about how do we prioritize spending during a particularly difficult time to do that. I think that's the right conversation to be having. And I think understanding the role of any agency and the size of it is an important thing that we do. And so we did that in corrections, we did it in NYPD, and of course we did in every agency. So it's an important conversation. I know it becomes very political very fast, but I think from just sort of an economic fiscal standpoint, it certainly makes a lot of sense for us to be talking about these issues as a group, and also to be making decisions that I think most accurately reflect a balancing of priorities here. And so we'll be doing that probably again sometime starting in January, when the mayor puts out his new budget, to see what the priorities are and to find the right balance between those things. The one thing I'll add is I was happy the mayor restored some funding to our capital funding budget around affordable housing last week, which is one of the things that I was and others were concerned about, was that capital funding is a little bit easier to spend right now and have access to it. So we should not, undermine our ability to build good affordable housing during a time where housing is becoming even a more fleeting thing for a lot of individuals. So I'll leave it at that, but obviously I'm here to take questions as well afterwards.
Yeah. And I think also it's important to note that we are in a serious fiscal crisis, and it's not going to go away even when COVID, knock on wood, gets better.
We are in it for the next few years, and we have some, as a state, we have some reserves that we've been able to save up over the last couple of years, but ultimately we're going to need to have a conversation with either federal relief or state borrowing or additional cuts, and probably maybe some combination of things. So you're right, we're gonna be in a economic hole here for quite a few years, and that's going to require us to make tough choices that nobody wants to have to make, but we're going to have to be prepared to make choices that challenge us. So I think thanks for recognizing that as well.
All right, and this is good because I think it'll leave us a lot of time for questions as well. So I'd like to turn it over to Senator Krueger.
Thank you very much. I'm always glad to do anything with Keith Powers. And again, I give him the due respect that he is on the committee that deals with these issues. Yeah. I'm not on the committee that per se deals with these issues, but I want to just clarify. Well, I'm going to talk about bail reform. I want everyone to understand we did 3 major changes to criminal justice reform at the exact same time, and they interrelate. And sometimes people are asking me questions and they think it's a bail question, but it's not. It's a discovery question, or it's a speedy trial question. So I'm just going to try to go through fairly quickly this pretty massive set of changes we made to New York state law in 2019. Also before COVID, before this literal explosion of past due awareness of the differing treatments different communities receive from police officers throughout this country. But these changes have also been rolled into the discussion of today because that's how it works. So what we passed, we changed the bail laws so that new law eliminates cash bail as a pretrial option for people accused of misdemeanors and non-violent felonies, which is disproportionately the huge numbers of people who were going into Rikers Island, by the way, and staying there for extended period of time. So we changed it so you're not going to end up in Rikers simply because you do not have cash bail to pay if the charge brought against you is a misdemeanor or is a non-violent felony. So when I sometimes hear people say, but now they're not allowed to charge them. No, this has nothing to do with police charging people with crimes and arresting them. That didn't change at all. And this has nothing to do with how long they might be found guilty for and placed in jail. That is an after trial process. This is just bail before facing a trial. It's also not true that courts have nothing they can do but release you, because the individuals charged with the crime who are no longer eligible for bail still face a situation where the courts can, if they feel it is appropriate, and it's enormous power to the judges and the DAs, they can require regular mandatory check-ins, and they can even require electronic ankle monitoring, so that while you might not get a bail assignment that you can't pay resulting in your being in Rikers, you could have an electric bracelet, so to speak, on your arm or leg during the time period until your trial. So that's the basic reality of bail, and it's been turned into these wild stories of stopping police from arresting people. Nope, this didn't change any criminal statutes about whether someone's going to be arrested or not. It also didn't change the fact that it's not violent felonies. And if you're picked up a second time on something while awaiting trial, then that bail deal is broken, and we can charge you bail, and we can put you in Rikers until such time that you have your day in court. But the system we set up has actually been working quite effectively so far, and there is statistically no increase in the number of people picked up a second time while awaiting trial. Okay, so people haven't changed their behavior to do more bad things while awaiting trial, and they have been showing up for trial, even though the courts have been closed, adding to the challenges of getting court cases done. People are showing up with their lawyers on Zooms. They're showing up for check-ins. They are not attempting to avoid the court situation just because we didn't put them in Rikers because they didn't have $500 to get themselves out. So that's basically bail reform. Then we also reformed the New York discovery laws to be consistent with most states in the country, where district attorneys cannot withhold evidence from the charged person. We had a complex historic system where there were too many ways that district attorneys could avoid giving the evidence, the discovery evidence, to the lawyer for the accused until right before trial. This put the accused at a major disadvantage for being able to prepare for the trial, and it also meant that lawyers were constantly asking for extensions and not going to trial because they were still trying to get the evidence package from the district attorney's offices. So while there's also some rumors about how horrible it is that DAs have to hand over all their evidence to the defendant's attorneys, that's actually how the Constitution is set up. And that's how basically 47 states were already doing it until we came along and didn't do it this way. So I get very confused about why some people think this has tied the hands of DAs, tied the hands of police. It has not. I mean, if you're a district attorney, you take an oath to prove your case in court. And actually, you are supposed to make sure you help get innocent people out. So not turning the full evidence package over to the defendant's lawyers is, in my opinion, it shouldn't have even been a fight, but trust me, it was a 30-year fight. Then we also passed what was called the speedy trial requirement. New York State had a terrible record of getting people to court for their trials. And that meant that we were constantly being sued for delaying people's right to their day in court, which again is a fundamental constitutional right. If we charge you, we are supposed to give you your day in court where you can attempt to defend yourself and prove you're innocent, or we prove you're guilty. That's the way it's supposed to work. But if we let you sit in jail, and in our case in New York City, in Rikers, for years, literally sometimes years, and keep delaying getting you into that courtroom for your trial, we have flunked many tests as a society. And by the way, it is costing the city a huge amount of money to keep people in Rikers when they should have had their day in court and not be sitting in Rikers. So in our speedy trial reforms, we do require that we follow the constitutional requirement that we give a speedy court date and that we actually get your court case done. Now, just as a comparison, let me note, 66% of inmates in New York State jails are unsentenced inmates, and 77% of the people in New York City jails, mostly Rikers, are unsentenced because they have not completed their trial. The example that a lot of people remember is the case of Khalif Browder, who spent 3 years on Rikers Island awaiting a trial for charges of stealing a backpack, including over 400 days in solitary confinement, despite never being convicted. And if they'd had the $500 for bail, or we had our new bail reform laws, and he never would have been in Rikers in the first place on that kind of charge. And then, of course, people know the story that after he did finally get out of Rikers, he ended up committing suicide. So the three different things we did all go together, and there are impacts, but I will tell you that it's still early. It's still maybe a year and a few months since we've gone into implementation. I don't believe any of the examples of some crime statistics going up in New York City have anything to do with the bail reform, the discovery law, or the speedy trial law. But what we do know is fewer people who can't afford bail are ending up sitting in jail waiting for their court date. They're not losing their jobs because they're sitting in jail. Of course, they may have lost their jobs between COVID and unemployment. They are having speedier trials, even in a time where it's hard to actually get a trial in a courtroom. And their lawyers are reporting that they are able to get the evidence they should have been provided all along to make their case. Now, that means DAs may lose more cases, because in the past, a fairly common practice in New York courts where DAs would plead, people would plead out on a lesser charge just so they could finally get themselves, out. They probably already did more time in waiting than they would have been charged with. So it is true, DA's rates of winning trials probably have gone down. That's not necessarily a bad thing for all of us. And I don't think if I was a DA, I would be telling my staff that they should personalize this. It's not really a competition, or it's not supposed to be a competition. It's supposed to be fair justice for all, following constitutional standards. And if we can keep more people out of jail while still ensuring they do not continue criminal actions, that is a win for all of us, not to mention the budgets of the state and the city, because we can spend upward, starting $55,000 to $95,000 a year to keep someone in jail. So my husband, a college professor, has always told me, at least the young ones, we should just send them to Harvard. Yep, some will drop out, but it's still cheaper than jail. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. And really quickly before we turn to questions, if you could just kind of maybe state what the actual purpose of bail is, because I think in this misinformation age, it's become, people have started viewing bail as a means to keep streets safe, when I don't think that's actually what it's.
Thank you. The only purpose in bail is to make sure people show up for their day in court. It was never designed as a model to punish people, nor a model to keep dangerous people off the streets. That is why you want police to do their jobs and catch guilty people. Then you want fair trials and speedy decisions. A speedy decision in court will result in the guilty people being assigned time and keeping them off the streets. Is that the right answer?
Yeah, yeah. I just think, especially now, sometimes it's important to go back to the
You're absolutely right. Thank you very much. You're absolutely right.
Thank you. And I do see we have a question already from Billy. So if we can unmute Billy Freeland.
You just want to remind everybody how they ask questions?
Sure. So to ask questions, please raise your hand if you look at your Zoom app, you'll see there's a blue hand. If you just press it, it'll raise your hand, and then we'll call on you and unmute you. All right. So, really.
So I apologize because I'm going to have to hop out of here in a minute, which is why Rebecca is very nicely letting me ask a question. And thank you both, because I think you're both explaining these issues incredibly well. And I think that's what this topic needs. It's a lot more explaining and illuminating what's actually going on. So I just want to make a couple kind of points, and then I promise they will be tucked into a question here. On the budget stuff that Keith talked about, I think there's a lot of misconceptions around what exactly was cut. And a huge chunk was, shifting things like from, I think, NYPD to DOE for school safety officers. And Keith will, of course, fact check anything I get wrong here. And there's also a huge amount, I think 355 million was for overtime savings. And as we all know, that's a bit murky and fluid, and that, the police can blow past their allocated overtime budget in any given year. So I just think, when we talk about, we've become less safe because the budget's been cut, I think we need to really talk about what does it mean that the budget's been cut. And then onto sort of what Senator Krueger was talking about on bail reform, I'd like to see more discussion, particularly with the 19th precinct, about the purpose of bail, as Rebecca was alluding to, and what exactly the bail reform did. I've been alarmed to see in meetings with the 19th precinct, I think, a misunderstanding of what the law is. I've heard them misstate what bail reform has actually done. And I don't blame them. I don't think there's a nefarious purpose here. I think there's just a misunderstanding. And I think it would be great if, as a community, whether it's through a task force or some other means, we could come together with the 19th precinct, with the DA's office, with advocates, to really talk about what's happening here. Because I've heard stories of police officers telling witnesses, yeah, I can't protect you if you're a witness in this case. I've got to give up your information. But we know that the bail reform, actually rather the discovery law, Senator Krueger, say you can get a protective order to protect a witness. And if that's not being communicated to would-be witnesses, perhaps that explains why we're seeing more shootings in the city rather than this amorphous idea of the bail reform. And the last thing I'll say is I'd love for us to have a community conversation about what it means to be safe. We talk about bail as if that's what makes us safe. We don't talk about all the studies that show incarceration is destructive. Keeping people locked up longer than they ought to be is destructive. And how does that keep us safe? It certainly doesn't keep the incarcerated person safe. And then when we reintegrate them into society, we don't give them almost anything to get back on their feet with. They've gone through what Chief Judge Littman once called absolute hell. how is that making us as a society safe? And so my message would be, I hope as a community board, we talk to the 19th precinct about, are you having too narrow a view of how to keep our community safe? Because I think a bigger view would look at the long-term consequences of incarcerating people. So I want to thank a council member and the senator. I guess that wasn't really a question, but my point is, if we take away anything from this, I hope it's, let's turn down the temperature. Let's turn down the Twitter fighting with everybody. And let's actually have a conversation about what safety means. And I think that would be really productive for us as a community. So
Yeah. Thank you, Billy. And I'll just add one thing, which is we should also just follow some of the data on some of these things. As Liz said, if you follow some of the numbers, I look at them as the chair a lot from Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice about impact of bail reform on shootings, when shootings inclined over this year. It has little to do with the budget conversation. It has little to do with when you look at the actual arrests, the change in the state laws. There are things happening, and we should not ignore or gloss over very serious issues, but we should actually try to investigate the causes of them. Like everything from guns that are getting, illegally imported into this city to what's happening on the ground and what's the cause of it. But we are often not doing that. And I do have concerns similarly that sometimes we're talking without really kind of understanding what the key issues are, and that we would do better if we were able to kind of have a starting point that kind of relied on experts to provide some data here to us to better understand. And then we can do our jobs. We can figure out we can debate those issues appropriately.
I agree. I thank you, Billy, for what you were saying. It is a perception versus reality. And I think when it comes to crime and a sense of whether you're safe or not, perception is very real. So we do have to sort of have the serious conversations as a community and neighbors. And I will just point out that, with the rising rate of shootings, which is absolutely the kind of crime that scares us all, and with good reason, if you look at data on why do shootings and violent crimes go up or what triggers them, number one, a drop in employment. So we're going through this massive, hopefully temporary drop of employment. And our crime rate is still nothing compared to what it was for decades that had lower unemployment. So I'm not saying hip hip hooray, we're only having this number of shootings. I'm far from saying that. But we need to ask ourselves, why do we end up in different situations? As Keith just pointed out, when illegal guns can easily get to our city through other states that don't take gun laws seriously, that increases the chances of dangerous guns getting in the wrong hands, regardless of our gun laws. When you have a jump in 18 to 25-year-olds and a plummeting of employment, that is when you see, with all due respect, younger men getting in trouble with crime. And the stats show that. So if we can get our jobs back and focus the attention for supporting people to get jobs for themselves, that is also going to just lower our crime rate by definition. So the answer is not always from the police, because I don't think we're expecting the police to be an economic development employment agency, even though helping 18 to 25-year-olds who are low income to get jobs would probably be the fastest thing we could do to decrease crime in our city. So I'm glad you combined those committees. Thank you, community.
Yeah.
I think, Barbara, you're unmuted, so you don't have to raise your hand. Yeah, we can hear you.
Muted.
You're good.
Yeah, okay. First of all, thank you both, but I do want to start off with some answer with, I agree with what Billy said. Billy, we tried real hard to have a further discussion on both sides, and it was fruitless. I will not begin to tell you the number of hours that I spent in dealing with not only the police, but people related to it. And it is a hot button. We will continue along the way. Liz, I have to tell you, I knew pieces I thought I knew about this, and you explained it so beautifully and so wonderfully. I didn't realize I should have, but I didn't realize the three different parts that are.
That's okay.
And the one thing that I will add to what Billy says is the cycle. It's not only unemployment, but once they're in prison, in jail, and they come out, and then they can't get housing, and they can't get another job, and they haven't been paying child support, it just becomes such a tremendous vicious cycle for no reason except they were poor to begin with. They couldn't afford the money. So, and I've spent a lot of time talking to judges and people to hear the other side of the story, and I came away saying, I don't get the other side of the story, I will say. Keith, I thank you also, but I do have a couple of questions. I heard sort of two things. One is it was a budget issue, and the other, it was a restructuring issue. If it's a budget, all the budgets, you know, when I worked and my company said we had to cut down, or other things I hear, they say you have to take a 10% cut, and it's up to you to decide how to do it. It seems to me that the council, if I'm not mistaken, actually determine how the money should be changed. Do you agree with me?
No, I mean, in collaboration with the mayor. You know, the hardest thing about budgets is that you kind of need each other on this one. We have to vote on it and pass it. He's got to implement it. And so we negotiate with the mayor. So we had some positions that differ from him, and ultimately had a, you know, if you believe in that collaborative effort here to try to make this all work, you have to come to a deal with the mayor. And so he had some different positions than us, but we ultimately negotiated.
I do have a question. I certainly understand the funding problem generally. And when I did speak to the police, they all said they think certain reforms are extremely important. I don't think anybody agrees with it. I think one problem that I hear and I feel is that monies were taken away without planning. So let me give you two examples. One is the homeless situation. I'm confused about who do you call, you know, if things happen. And I know if it's violent, you call this one. Do we have the social workers that are trained to take care of the homeless? Did we take it away without funding the other group to do it? Do we have that group? And what I'm hearing is from many people that we don't have enough of them. And let me give you a second example. I know that they just switched from the police department to Board of Education, but my memory is that we had the police going to schools because of all of the horrible shootings from Sandy Hook on. We don't want teachers to have guns, and yet we feel we want to protect our children. And very often when a police goes in, they could wear regular clothing, they can have a gun without anybody knowing they have a gun and serve some purpose. I'm wondering if things would change, but those were two examples I could think of.
Yeah, I'll take them both. So even prior to the shootings in Sandy Hook and so forth, I think it was under Giuliani, they moved the cops into the schools and made them PD. The central complaint that we had heard from folks is that, first of all, these are still young, you know, kids from high school age and younger, and that interaction in that age with the police department can have a change in that trajectory in their entire life. And that they're also, you know, at times you want to be able to have, under the school system, you want to have the Department of Education and the principal, the school building, to feel like they're part of the school community, not a separate entity outside of it, to help with collaboration around how to treat particular disciplinary issues. And that was the main issue, is not trying to make it feel like a school is a overly enforced area, but to have some entity there to, you know, to tackle fights or violence or address issues, have some way for PD to be around and available if something gets really out of control, but also to make sure that this is more part of the actual totality of the environment in school building. The second part on the homeless issue, it is a transition. We do have currently services funded. There's street outreach teams to go out to folks who are because you're mostly talking about the street population here, go out and talk to folks. If there's a violent issue, you still call the police department. If there's a violent encounter or something you think is putting your safety in jeopardy. But from the normal encounters of the person on the street, the idea is try to get that person off the street with good shelters and good beds and good space for people to feel like there's a safe space for them to go. and outreach to do that. I would admit that that's still a bit of a transition that's happening here, and that there is a transition happening from the PD and the Department of Homeless Services. They're trying to find out where exactly that handoff occurs. I think what I will say on the budget otherwise, and I want to add this to people, is we didn't cut, and this is a thing people complained about too, but we're doing any reduction of headcount on the police department through not adding new cops, we're decreasing the amount of cops we're hiring in the next couple of years. We are capping overtime to keep some spending down and not to be over reliant on it. That has to come to the council for approval if they want to change it. And we're trying to steady out the headcount so we can move that money to other things that were needed. The headcount, though, reduction, we didn't go out and fire a bunch of cops. We didn't take cops out of the 19th precinct. There was certainly a conversation about doing attrition that way. But from talking a lot of communities who felt like they still needed some public safety in their areas, to do that steadily, and also to better address spending overall that way. But I think that the misconception is when we slashed all the budgets, we removed all the cops. No, we did something that we thought balanced the two things that we need to do, is to decrease and right size the budget and the headcount, and also to bring it back to just a few years ago, what it was before. Actually, my predecessor city council, added a lot of folks to bring it back to a reasonable level during a moment where we still had a very safe city, and to be able to move that spending to different areas during the recession. So it was not, I think it was been defined as sort of like we, abolished the police over there. No, we tried to do something that was balanced, that got to different needs here of different communities, and also at the same time, you're right, to change the roles of it. But that role, all that stuff is a transition. And I think it's right to do it through a transition. I don't think it's right to do it with a big shock to the system. I think it's right to actually transition and have a steady conversation, but we just can't forget that. We have to keep doing that next year and the year before, is to continue to have a dialogue about what the role should be.
Is there any way you think you will bridge the tremendous tension with the police?
I think that, look, I will say that it's a good question. Look, I hope so. I think that on one hand, I do hear, from the leadership at the police department that we understand we need to make reforms. I rarely hear the ideas, though, or the ideas for what that actually looks like. Like, what are the roles that you think should maybe shift out of the department? What are the ways we can get better accountability? I think the heart of this conversation is making sure that there is appropriate accountability for someone who has either a history of bad behavior or does something outside of the job. And I think that what I found, I'm not trying to, is that I have great relationships with the precincts here, but I do hear a lot of misinformation. I do hear misinformation from leadership, whether it's about the bail reform, the laws, and the impact of them, and just finding bail inappropriately, to basic things like tweets that go out that try to blame us for shootings that happened in the city, when we know there's lots of different inputs into that. And I think if we could have an honest conversation and we could actually get rid of that type of, I think, misinformation, and that it would actually lead to an honest conversation. But I think I'll be honest, like I have not seen that as much as I'd like. And in fact, I could open up my social media probably at any hour of any day and see types of information that goes out that I think is just flagrantly wrong. And I think that just leads to further tension here. And I think that, as I have said, like, I try to read the data to know what's going on in our precincts, in our community, and also what's happening citywide. I can do a fairly decent job explaining it, but I don't really hear that, and I think that's harmful. But I'm, I certainly am one amongst those who's willing to try to make sure that we have a good dialogue. I think it's important to the city and my district. But I do get concerned that some of the information going out is intentionally misleading. And by the way, I don't mean to pick on anybody, but I do think it would be extremely helpful if just on the four square basics, like wearing a mask and things like that, became more embedded in the culture here, and that there was actually a culture where the leaders at the top led, and it came down to the precinct level. I think that would just instill some basic confidence in us. There's a chain of accountability or chain of command here that with civilians that actually can permeate it.
And Barbara, if I might throw in, I find it fascinating. I've been the senator will be 20 years in January. Always had an excellent relationship with all 3.5 precincts that overlap my district, 13, 17, 19, and then East Midtown. And yet, just in the last few months, somehow it's perceived of that I'm anti-police, or that I don't understand the importance of what they do in our community every day. So I keep pointing out, my communities never really had a problem with police. They don't understand where they are right now. They want them back out in their streets, patrolling, responding to 911. And in a couple of my precincts, they spent several months, frankly, barricaded in their buildings, not coming out and responding to calls for the police. And the answer was, well, people are mean to us. We're not going out there anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I could say people are mean to me sometimes
Nobody was
too,
happy to
but
you.
I asked you to give me the job. I'm supposed to do it for you, even if you're mean to me. And it's a paramilitary organization. So I have pointed out, actually, in a paramilitary organization, leaders are supposed to make sure that the people under them, the men and women, know what their jobs are and know what the changes in the laws are. And so I do worry that there needs to be a bit of a culture change at the top in the NYPD. And I've been accused of being anti-police because I have criticized, and I will again, the leadership of the two police unions, the Sergeants Benevolent Association and the PBA. I think that the two leaders of those organizations, and everyone has every right to join a labor union. I'm a strong supporter of labor unions, but they happen to have two labor leaders who are intentionally inflammatory and factually incorrect about what they are telling their members about any of these changes that Keith has been discussing or I've been discussing. Now, what they're really mad at the state about, but that didn't come up yet, is a different law we passed, which was the 50A law, which actually changed a loophole that never should have existed, where police who were accused of bad behavior, and it's always only a small percentage, like in lots of other fields, but that the public didn't get that information, even if they were bringing a complaint against someone and it would, quote unquote, be evidence of a pattern of bad behavior. We had gotten to the point in the city where several district attorneys had created their own lists, district attorneys creating their own lists of police officers they would not allow to testify in their trials because they knew that their reputations were so bad that they could get their cases thrown out if they were the witnesses. So something had gone amok for some small percentage of police officers where no one was holding them accountable decade after decade. And once you're not holding someone accountable, it changes the way other people approach it. Oh, well, I can get away with that too, because so-and-so has been getting away with that. And so we did change that law. And now people have to be able to explain their records, and they can be used by Civilian Complaint Review Board. And the documentation can be gotten if someone is bringing a charge against a police officer. And when you sign up to be a police officer, you actually don't sign anything saying, and now you're not liable for following the laws yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that really what is setting some people off is the 50A law, but they don't want to say that that's what they're really upset about. So they're saying incorrect things about bail reform and criminal justice reform, and changing the use of the city funding for police, and even claiming that the city's taken away so much money that they can't even have police officers doing their jobs anymore. And none of that is true. And I think Keith and I can document it statistically. And, the Daily News is not a liberal rag newspaper. And the Daily News has written this whole series of articles about the changes in crime rate have nothing to do with the changes in the law that Albany's passed or the changes in policy that the city has moved through their budget and through committees like Keith's. And so I think it is really important that we just try to stay on fact. And I do think that will change people's attitude over time. But
The
it's
other
gonna
thing
take a
I
while.
heard that they're very upset about is the chokehold bill.
Yes. Actually, there's a city one and a state one.
There's a state one and a city one. There, I think more upset with the city one. And there was a dialogue, I think, at some point about making sure that the bill reflected the desires of the council. Even the unions did not want to do that. They rejected any whether we would do it or not, it's a different question, but they certainly rejected any opportunity to have a conversation about it because they wanted to sue on it and take it to court and fight it that way, which actually will leave their members, if they think it's devastating, they will leave their members in a worse spot if they're unsuccessful there. But look, I think a basic thing here that the council thinks is that you can make an arrest and you can do your job as an officer without having to resort to putting a knee on someone's neck, putting a choke on someone. And that cannot be the only basis for saying that crime is going up, which is kind of the dialogue that's going on here. And so, we're always happy to have a dialogue with folks to make sure that what we do and what we intend is appropriate, and also we're keeping people safe. But I think that the attacks on that have been fairly hard to follow, and have been, I think, stoking a lot of fear amongst their members.
Right. Thank you, because I've heard that fear-mongering I just wanted to bring up.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
my many hours of discussion with the police, with people related to the police and pro-police that I heard. Thank you.
Sure.
I saw Barry had a question, but then he lowered his hand. Barry, do you still want to ask something, or? Let's see if I can see you.
No,
Oh, now I
thank
can
you.
see you.
Pass.
No? Okay. And then we'll go to Alita, and I want to remind the public that they can ask questions too. You don't have to be a board member. So you can just raise your hand and we'll call on you as well.
Because
All right, Alita?
when you said Bill,
I just wanted to say that I'm really interested in the idea, and thank you, Liz and Keith, for being here and being so informative and so calm about these issues that are obviously of great concern. But I'm intrigued and interested in the idea of trying to create or work on employment opportunities for, I guess an expression might be at-risk youth, or people who might be more inclined, might have a difficult time without employment or without being in school, and maybe, and so it's not really a question so much as asking for your help, Senator Krueger, to be able to do some kind of program on that and find a way to be able to help people find jobs, because it affects not just our community, but it's obviously it's a citywide issue, and it just sounds like it's something that that we could work on and maybe be able to at least have a positive leaning conversation in the sense of having ideas or a direction or something like that. And in terms of dialogues with the police, that's always, I think, a good idea, although the issues are clearly bigger than just the community board, or the communication chain is bigger than just the community board. So again, thank you for the opportunity to make these comments, and thank you for such informative discussion. And for Council Member Powers to also be able to work on that, because the issues seen from 10,000 feet or 5,000 feet are different than where we are as a community board. So thank you.
I would love to, have a magic answer for all of that, Alita, but there are many groups who work with troubled teens and work on job skills and job opportunities, both for young adults before they get themselves in real trouble. But there are also groups who work with people coming out of jail, because that's also, the research has shown, if someone is coming out of a prison situation, what is the most effective way to ensure that they don't go right back into recidivism? And the number one answer is a job. They get a job, they don't go back to a life of crime. Not universally, not one-to-one ratio, but it's the most effective model. And so for young adults, what has proved to be one of the most effective models, and this is, this also ties into the issues of segregation in our city in many cases. Quality internships, while they're still like in a high school situation, have proved to be incredibly valuable for helping young people who may not have the strongest role models in their lives for how you prepare yourself to go out and search for a job, or how to make the right decisions about whether or not you should be going to college and what kind of college. I mean, I know when I was running anti-poverty groups, one of the things that I was doing all the time for people was urging them not to imagine that they had to pay for private colleges when they didn't have enough money, and they were trying to go back to college, perhaps after being young parents, but now have stabilized. I was like, check out CUNY. I was amazed how many people were getting sucked into signing away student loans and grants and money they'd owe back to just do their first couple of years of college, when my office, when I was running an organization, was a few blocks from BMCC. I was like, everybody get yourself to BMCC. Let's see how hard it is for you to get back into the rigors of college after having been out of high school for maybe 10 years. Let's see how much you can pull off on nights and weekends in classes that aren't going to cost you anything. And then if it turns out, you're a rock star for education, well, then you're going to apply for another college for your junior and senior year. Or you'll be able to go into one of the good CUNY senior colleges. So, and it was amazing how people were like, but nobody ever told us those options. We didn't realize. And so we didn't have anyone to ask. And the same thing is true when you take, high school students in from the Upper East Side for internships, and I do, and Keith does. The difference in the knowledge base they have about the world and how they're supposed to act in a work environment and what the next possible steps are for themselves, it is night and day between what exposure they've already had when they enter your office versus taking somebody who's a 10th grader, perhaps from the South Bronx, and doesn't come from a family where people have a lot of job experience, certainly not education experience. And so if we could just think of ways to expand quality internships for low-income high school students in this city, we would see an amazing improvement in people's opportunities. I really do believe that.
Maybe the community board could be helpful in terms of providing some kind of channel receptacle for internships. I don't know, or posting. I know that these are of limited utility resources. We did do a program a few years ago on reintroducing formerly incarcerated people, and I know I was highly educated from that program, and I know that it was received that way by the people who attended it, that it's not even misinformation. I think there's a lack of information. And certainly I think if people understood the connect between lack of employment, lack of role models, lack of mentoring, lack of people with financial resources to help and provide advice, and certain types of crime, that there would be a lot more interest in something like that. I don't know really, and I should know what the city has, but to be able to focus on that, I see this as a time to reimagine the city. We're in such dire straits in so many ways, and something that's formalized where there are opportunities to work among the private groups in the city would just be, I think, very interesting to people. So I know that this is tangential to the issue of the police and funding and some difficulties that the city has been experiencing with the police, but it's something that might lead to I guess a better overall community or an environment, including between the cops and the neighbors and different things going on in the street. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Brian and then Judy.
Hey, thanks. I appreciate it. So, Alita, just to piggyback on what you were saying, if there was a way on the community board to maybe like post, I actually know of an employer that really, it's a call center, but since COVID, they've gone completely remote, like most call centers obviously have, that really focuses on giving opportunities to as a second chance employer. They're hiring right now. They're based out of Florida. So, I mean, if there's a way we can post that, I mean, I know a lot of people could definitely take advantage of that job. They had a little struggle because they were a second chance employer before COVID started, and they happened to do, or I guess hire a lot more drug addicted people. And since COVID, when they went on lockdown, everything went remote, that's a particular population of employees that they had ended up relapsing, and they actually lost a lot of people. So they're like desperately looking for people. So if there's a way to post that, please let me know, and I'll share that employer information with the rest of the community board. As far as going back to tonight's topic, you know, when I was at grad school at Baruch, I studied, you know, bail reform even before it was passed last year. So I know a lot about this topic, and I've looked, you know, really much into it. And I appreciate all the work that was done. And I'm really proud that the state really has passed this, you know, reform, because I think it was a long time coming from it. For that information, I have a question for both of you, because the public dialogue about defund the police is so negative, and so it's even far from departure from reality for what it really means, what the defunding the police. And us as community leaders, all of us collectively as community leaders, I guess my question is for each of you is, how do we change that conversation? Because the constant thing that we're going back to when people hear defund the police is exactly what, you know, Councilmember Powers was saying, is that they're just sloshing the police fund and reducing the number of cops on the street, and that's why it's leading to this increase in crime. But that's a far departure from what it really means. So how do we change that conversation? How do we change that dialogue?
Yeah, thanks. Well, look, I think that there was lots of different folks were using, you know, these terms differently. To be honest, like I think some folks were saying, you know, revision, and some Republicans are really like sort of move money. But yeah, I think on the whole, people were talking about reprioritization of spending and role. And so I think I would talk more about that in terms of how do we focus on our priorities here in the city. And budgets are always about priorities, but right now they're particularly about how are we going to spend a dwindling pot of money, or a place where we're not going to have excess, we're tapping into our reserves. So I think, I do think it does matter which terms you use, but I also think when you talk about it, really talking about it in a way that is clear about what the priorities are and how, and maybe even looking at the history of the last few years, we've had generally a safe city. We, you know, even a few years back, not that long ago, had something similar in terms of budget and head count, and we're able to maintain a safe city. So I think context helps. I think these types of things help, where we can all talk together as a group about these issues. And I also think, you know, when you use big terms, you have to also be able to kind of explain really what it means and what someone envisions. But that's hard to do. Like this year in particular, I think it was hard to do because there was so many people participating that it was hard to really get a handle on what different folks were discussing or thinking. But I think framing this issue, framing that discussion around particular values and ideas, I think is helpful. And also I think what we talked about at the council was, where do our priorities lie? How do we balance these? You know, how do we sort of make sure we're not overfunding one place versus, you know, underfunding or gutting other stuff? And I think that's one way to think about it. I think also that elected officials tend to receive that dialogue well when you really talk about where should our priorities lie.
All right, thanks. I don't know if the senator wanted to add anything to that.
No, I appreciate your, you know, understanding the complexities of the laws that we did change. And look, some of this I do think is a bit the growing pains of changing significant laws all at one time, when I don't think any of us really planned to, you know, hit our heads up against COVID, mass international economic chaos, and an increase in social unrest, even though there's all kinds of reasons for it at the same time. So it is, every day I get up and go, government doesn't have all the answers. And I'm not even sure I know anyone who's lived through a parallel experience to ask. And I don't remember feeling that way previously in this job. And trust me, I spent all 20 years not really feeling like I have all the answers. But it's really only this 6 months where it's, I don't know who to ask for the answers either, because we're all struggling with what people jokingly call the new normal. But lots of things about the new normal aren't particularly great. And we're hoping that they don't stay our normal for that long. So, I'm not really that much of a praying woman, but I do pray for a specific outcome on Tuesday in the election. And it's not about my election. And I do pray that there is a vaccine very, very soon for this disease. And that then we can produce large quantities of it and convince Americans not to fall for false information about vaccines and refuse to take that vaccine, because that's really what we're going to need in order to see ourselves moving back into the lives that we had in New York City with all the struggles, right? People live here because they love living with 8.5 million people on top of each other in this crazy mixed quilt of everyone in the world. That's why we're here. That's why I'm here. And right now, we don't have the good parts. We just have the challenge parts. So, that's everybody stay strong, work together, and be creative every day about how we can try to come up with good answers. And when you have any, feed them to me. I am interested in all of your good answers on any issue you want to touch on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Next, Judy Schneider.
There's Judy.
Councilmember Powers, a comment and a question.
Sure.
I want to thank you for prioritizing and seeing to it that we have a new academy class for the police coming up. So I think that's really important. It will increase the number of police out on the streets in 6 months, and I thank you for that. I'm a little confused in hearing comments from our officers at the precinct about, I don't know if it's the chokehold law or what law it was that the city passed, but the big part that seems to be affecting the precinct is the fact that they can no longer touch the diaphragm or the back of individuals when they try to arrest them. And it's very difficult if you can no longer touch the individuals other than their arms for the police to be able to arrest individuals in committing a crime. And therefore, depending on how serious it is, they may or may not do it. And that's what I've heard. So maybe you could explain that part of city law, because there seems to be some confusion. And before we get to that, one other comment. I think that if we want to have a dialogue with the police and everyone, that you and the senator need to set this up with one police plaza, because I don't believe that the precincts can come out and speak on these issues. I think it has to come from one people. Thank you.
No, thank you. No, I agree that it starts at top, and we're going to need any new next mayor, next leadership and commissioner. I think that this is really going to be about the future, to be committed to having real change, and also, being instructive to where they think those changes can occur. Because I think that has been the hardest part of this conversation, is that we do, like I said earlier, I think I do hear a sentiment from folks. Of course, there should be some changes, but I don't really hear a lot of support for making changes. And so I think there's a disconnect there between the words and the action. I think we need to hear what they think those types of things are, including get people who have really bad records out of the police force. I think if you have a bad disciplinary record, or if you have done something really bad, you should not be allowed to wear that uniform anymore. And I think they should agree with that. And I think the department should agree with that. We can figure out where those lines are drawn. But beyond that, on the chokehold bill, so our law, so the state did a law too, but our law says that you can kneel or press or take other actions on the neck, on other parts of the body. But at the end of the day, you can't compress, not touch, compress the diaphragm by an action that, such as kneeling or placing an arm restriction or things like that. What it's meant to mean is that the George Floyd and the Eric Garner situations can't happen again. And that's I think we've all been very clear about that. Even the district attorneys themselves have said that's how they interpret it. If there was any question of it, that's how it would be treated. And I'll be honest, I don't actually know that I believe in full that is the law that is stopping things. So first of all, I think we can acknowledge and recognize that there are some incidents here that are going to be hard to prevent from the starting point, like in any major city, and that is going to be something we have to aspire to do. I don't believe that. I also don't think any of us expect our cop is going to be standing on every corner to prevent every crime. We certainly want them to be there to be preventative, but also to investigate and to catch people. But so I think we recognize that. And it's not the chokehold bill, the chokehold law that is leading to shootings or anything like that. I think there has been a miscommunication. I think there is misinformation happening. I think it's more from the leadership of the unions than even the PD, but I think it's happening both places about communicating it appropriately to members about the chokehold law. But I will say the lasting part of this, which is there was a member of the city council, head of the public safety committee, who said he was willing to work with the Garner family and other groups to at least address that particular part of the law and to make sure. And I think there was debate about it. There's a lot of mixed feelings about that in the council, but was said he would be willing to address that particular issue. So there was no confusion about it. And the unions do not want to do that. They do not want to amend the bill so that their members they're telling their members this bill is affecting your job. And on the other hand, they're telling them we do not want to amend it. And the reason they don't want to amend it is they'd rather take it to court and fight it out in court. And if they win in court, they win in court. If they lose in court, that law stands. And so I do question the motives here of whether they want to have a serious dialogue about this, or they want to use it as a political rallying call to mobilize their members. And if you believe that they think this is a really serious issue that needs to be addressed, they would be at the table talking to members about this issue. And we would debate. I mean, if we said no, then they have other ways to fight it. But I think it's being used as a tool to mobilize members as a rallying call here more than anything else. And I think we should be concerned about that. I've talked to the precincts about it. I've explained that to them. And I'm not sure what else to do or say, except to talk directly to members of the department and explain that to them. And I think it is being used inappropriately right now. And I think there has been attempts to try to, create a bridge between what they're saying and what the intention of the law was, for what it's worth.
And the state passed a law before the council, but it is somewhat different. And so I also would urge people who are experts to participate in discussions about amendments. We haven't actually been asked by the police to amend ours. I think they got a little fixated on the city council version. So the state law is, yes, you may put your hands on any part of the body necessary to conduct an arrest, but if you cause serious injury or death, you could face a felony. So we're saying, if you do this, be aware that the way you do it better not translate to serious injury or death, because then you are going to face a felony. Now, I suppose police officers could say they're not quite sure how they can guarantee that they don't cause the serious injury. I think you could figure out how you're causing death. And so you can get into all of this gray area of, if you do it this way, if you do it that way. But that's also why it makes huge sense for the police to evaluate what various models of training they have to get a recalcitrant suspect to agree to, be arrested without finding themselves in a situation where they're kneeling on a throat for, what was it, 9 sec? How long?
Yeah, almost 9 seconds. Yeah.
9 seconds. So, yes, you can definitely see scenarios of gray area, but we really felt that in the law we passed, we were basically saying, okay, we're not telling you you can't do this. We're telling you if you do this, the person needs not to end up with brain damage because their air has been cut off or dead. So some people think we left some more flexibility to the police, but the city council version also has a misdemeanor category. And so some people think that was better, that there was a misdemeanor option. And we chose not to go that route. We were just like, no, we won't get involved with you as long as you don't do real harm. But if you do real harm, you're going to face a real penalty. So I don't think necessarily the police like either bill, but I just wanted to clarify because I know there's been some confusion, including to me, which is why I made a lawyer explain to me what the difference was between the two bills, that there is confusion out there about, different approaches. But I think we were totally in sync with each other that we're trying to make sure police are not doing serious harm to people in the process of arresting them.
And I'm sorry, I have to run in a second because I'm going to early vote because there's no line across the now. So I'm going to run and go do my civic duty.
There's no line. I just got an email that Wagner still has a 4-hour line.
It's crazy. I know. That's why I'm going to go take mine.
So I don't know what's going to happen.
So then I have one really quick question, and then I'll let you run. I know we've talked a lot about misinformation, which I do think is a big factor when it comes to the polarization of these issues. But I do think another side is overinformation. When you have apps like Citizen, which will give you an alert whether it's confirmed or not, if there's a robbery a couple blocks from you. And so I think what I've noticed is that unless we kind of combat that with the facts and stats, how much has crime risen, has it actually risen, people are going to be a lot more uncomfortable when it comes to talking about criminal justice reform. So I was just wondering if you have any thoughts on how do we combat this kind of new way of getting maybe a little too much information that you didn't know was going on until today.
Yeah, I certainly think the app itself has to figure out ways to make sure that as much as possible information is clarified. And I think it definitely puts this sort of sense of fear or something right in somebody's hand because they now see sort of all things true or not true in their hands. And my office has looked at that a little bit, like the fact checking part of it. But look, I think I overall tend to agree that the iPhones and everything else are, technology is a positive to our lives, but that is certainly one area where I think there's going to be need to, figure out better how to clear information and also just to have more public information out there as, information comes out about what's happening in your neighborhood, whether it's from CompStat or others, to be able to have a dialogue on that.
I don't have a great answer for that one. I have an equal concern that, there's again, when I said before, perception is as big a problem as reality when you talk about people's fears with crime. So I know I was following one of those at the time where there were in the 19th precinct, there were 3 guys with a gun running around, robbing people over a very short period of time. And people thought there was this whole crime wave, but it's the same 3 guys with 1 gun doing this. And then the cops caught them and then the crime wave was done. But it wasn't really a crime wave in the way people would think you would mean a crime wave. It was 3 bad guys, right, in our community robbing people, which should not have happened. But you know what? 5 years ago, most of us would never have known about that unless we went to some police meeting where it was presented. And there was these 3 guys and they were bopping people over their heads and making them give them their money, and we caught them. But now we all know it, and the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, every 7 minutes. And I'm just not sure our brains know how to absorb that and think about it correctly.
Yeah.
All
Okay.
right, I'm
Well,
running. Bye, guys.
Go vote.
Bye,
Thank you
guys.
so much.
Thank you, guys.
Cherokee.
I don't see any other questions, so I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you, Senator. We really
Wait.
appreciate it. And I am.
Wait,
Yeah?
Rebecca,
do we
I
have a
think
question?
Barbara Chalky is trying to wave you down.
Oh, okay. Let's unmute Barbara. Sorry, I saw her check, but I forgot to ask if that was a raised hand or not. So let's unmute
Barbara, just unmute. There you go.
Okay, I am muted. It's a short statement, and this is relating to both Keith and Liz talked about budget priorities and changing it. I chair the budget committee for Community Board 8, and we just finished the budget priorities and the needs statement for 2022 fiscal year, which any public members that are on, that starts in July 2020, in July. I was very concerned, and when I presented it, we did I think we did a good job on it. The full board passed it and discussed it. But my concern was that there's going to be lots of changes in 2021 with the cuts before we even get to the priorities in 2022. But I think both of you will get, Keith left already, but he and Liz, you'll get copies of it. But was really concerned the reality of this, because I expect to have to meet again and talk about the cuts in 2021. And Liz, just as you know, it didn't pass because I didn't have support for it in the committee, but I did I tried to make a recommendation that we asked the state legislature to do a wealth tax, but I only got support from 2 people on that, so I dropped it.
That's okay. Well, first off, yes, I worry also about where the money will be, from the state to the city and from the city to spend for the next couple of years. If the Democrats take the US Senate and the White House next Tuesday, so I will be partisan, we will start to see money from the federal government that we desperately need and we should have been seeing already. But you all read the newspaper, so you all know the US Senate was not going to pass the bill the House passed or even negotiate in good faith. If we win on Tuesday, we being me and anybody who shares my party, I don't know that we can see money right away either, because it's not clear to me why lame duck sessions of people who are leaving would decide to suddenly spend the money they weren't willing to spend all these months where it actually made a difference for them politically. But it's not that long till January 20th. And I'm really quite sure that a new Democratic leadership in Washington is not going to continue to try to starve us at the state and local level. So that will help quite a bit to help stimulate us and start moving us forward. Like I said, the second thing is we need that vaccine so that people actually can start moving back into jobs, into restaurants, into new opportunities for themselves. And I think that will, based on everything serious scientists are saying, that will happen in 21. So will we be where we should be in 22? Probably not, but we could be definitely on the upswing in 22. So when people ask me, do you think I might see more state money than I've gotten up till now? I say no. Let's hope you can see the money you thought you were getting this year and probably aren't when the feds come through, and assume probably flat spending or close to it the year after as well. Barbara, you know me forever. I am a believer in progressive taxation, and people who are wealthier should pay higher taxes. So I am the chair of the finance committee, and so I have a commitment to my leader that I will study everything, make sure my staff and I are ready to evaluate and answer all questions of my colleagues, but that I won't make public statements by signing on to any of the specific revenue bills. She can't totally keep me from just saying what I believe, because that's not who I am. But I'm not signing on to, I think there's 17 new revenue bills that basically are variations on higher taxes for wealthier New Yorkers.
Thank
So we are looking at every single one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so yeah, I just want to thank everyone for coming. And again, we're just starting to talk about these issues. I hope that we will be able to have a meeting with a representative from the police department and our elected officials. We're not quite there yet, but Barbara and I will keep working really hard to make sure that happens. And Barbara, do you have any?
No, I just want to
Final
thank you. I found it fascinating. I can't imagine. It cleared up so many issues that I have. And I too hope that we can have a civil discussion with the police, which I have to say my phone calls were.
Don't give up. Keep trying.
Yeah, I will.
All right. Thank you all.
The nice thing about Zoom, I said, is that nobody can throw eggs or anything like that.
And the commute is so short now for going home with
That's
everyone.
right. No traffic, right?
No traffic. All right. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Liz. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Liz.
And thank you to Will, as always.
Thank you, Will.
Right.
Are you guys motioning to adjourn?
Yep.
Okay.
Second, I'll second then. I guess we'll do chair motions.